Chapter 59 of the Count of Monte Cristo. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Wild Alaska. The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 59. The Will. As soon as Barrois had left the room, Noirtier looked at Valentine with a malicious expression that said many things. The young girl perfectly understood the look, and so did Villefort, for his countenance became clouded, and he knitted his eyebrows angrily. He took a seat, and quietly awaited the arrival of the notary. Noirtier saw him seat himself with an appearance of perfect indifference, at the same time giving a side look at Valentine, which made her understand that she also was to remain in the room. 3/4 of an hour after, Barrois returned, bringing the notary with him. "Sir," said Villefort, after the first salutations were over, "you were sent by M. Noirtier, whom you see here. All his limbs have become completely paralyzed. He has lost his voice also, and we ourselves find much trouble in endeavoring to catch some fragments of his meaning." Noirtier cast an appealing look on Valentine, which look was at once so earnest and imperative that she answered immediately. "Sir," said she, "I perfectly understand my grandfather's meaning at all times." "That is quite true," said Barrois, "and that is what I told the gentleman as we walked along." "Permit me," said the notary, turning first to Villefort and then to Valentine, "permit me to state that the case in question is just one of those in which a public officer like myself cannot proceed to act without thereby incurring a dangerous responsibility. The first thing necessary to render an act valid is, that the notary should be thoroughly convinced that he has faithfully interpreted the will and wishes of the person dictating the act. Now, I cannot be sure of the approbation or disapprobation of a client who cannot speak, and as the object of his desire or his repugnance cannot be clearly proved to me, on account of his want of speech, my services here would be quite useless and cannot be legally exercised." The notary then prepared to retire. An imperceptible smile of triumph was expressed on the lips of the procureur. Noirtier looked at Valentine with an expression so full of grief that she attested the departure of the notary. "Sir," said she, "the language which I speak with my grandfather may be easily learnt, and I can teach you in a few minutes to understand it almost as well as I can myself. Will you tell me what you require in order to set your conscience quite at ease on the subject?" "In order to render an act valid, I must be certain of the approbation or disapprobation of my client. Illness of body would not affect the validity of the deed, but sanity of mind is absolutely requisite." "Well, sir, by the help of 2 signs, which I will acquaint you, presently, you may ascertain with perfect certainty that my grandfather is still in the full possession of all of his mental faculties. M. Noirtier, being deprived of voice and motion, is accustomed to convey his meaning by closing his eyes when he wishes to signify yes, and to wink when he means no. You now know quite enough to enable you to converse with M. Noirtier. Try." Noirtier gave Valentine such a look of tenderness and gratitude that it was comprehended even by the notary himself. "You have heard and understood what your granddaughter has been saying, sir, have you?" asked the notary. Noirtier closed his eyes. "And do you approve of what she said? That is to say, you declare that the signs which she mentioned are really those by means of which you are accustomed to convey your thoughts?" "Yes." "It was you who sent for me?" "Yes." "To make your will?" "Yes." "And you do not wish me to go away without fulfilling your original intentions?" The old man winked violently. "Well, sir," said the young girl, "do you understand now? And is your conscience perfectly at rest on the subject?" But before the notary could answer, Villefort had drawn him aside. "Sir," said he, "do you suppose for a moment that a man can sustain a physical shock such as M. Noirtier has received without any detriment to his mental faculties? It is not exactly that, sir, said the notary, which makes me uneasy, but the difficulty will be in wording his thoughts and intentions, so as to be able to get his answers. You must see that to be an utter impossibility, said Villefort. Valentine and the old man heard this conversation, and Noirtier fixed his eye so earnestly on Valentine that she felt bound to answer the look. Sir, said she, that need not make you uneasy, however difficult it may at first sight to appear to be. I can discover and explain to you my grandfather's thoughts, so as to put an end to all your doubts and fears on the subject. I have now been 6 years with M. Noirtier, and let him tell you if ever once, during that time, he has entertained a thought which he was unable to make me understand. No, sighed the old man. Let us try what we can do, then, said the notary. You accept this young lady as your interpreter, M. Noirtier? Yes. Well, sir, what do you require of me, and what document is it that you wish to be drawn up? Valentine named all of the letters of the alphabet until she came to W. At this letter the eloquent eye of Noirtier gave her notice that she was to stop. It is very evident that it is the letter W which M. Noirtier wants, said the notary. Wait, said Valentine, and turning to her grandfather she repeated, Wa, we, we. The old man stopped her at the last syllable. Valentine then took the dictionary, and the notary watched her while she turned over the pages. She passed her finger slowly down the columns, and when she came to the word will, M. Noirtier's eyes bade her to stop. Will, said the notary. It is very evident that M. Noirtier is desirous of making his will. Yes, 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 motioned the invalid. Really, sir, you must allow that this is most extraordinary, said the astonished notary, turning to M. de Villefort. Yes, said the procureur, and I think the will promises to be yet more extraordinary, for I cannot see how it is to be drawn up without the intervention of Valentine, and she may perhaps be considered as too much interested in its contents to allow of her being a suitable interpreter of the obscure and ill-defined wishes of her grandfather. No, 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 replied the eye of the paralytic. What, said Villefort, do you mean to say that Valentine is not interested in your will? No. Sir, said the notary, whose interest had been greatly excited, and who had resolved on publishing far and wide the account of this extraordinary and picturesque scene, what appeared so impossible to me an hour ago has now become quite easy and practicable, and this may be a perfectly valid will, provided it be read in the presence of 7 witnesses, approved by the testator, and sealed by the notary in the presence of the witnesses. As to the time, it will not require very much more than the generality of wills. There are certain forms necessary to be gone through, and which are always the same. As to the details, the greater part will be furnished afterward by the state, in which we find the affairs of the testator, and by you yourself, who, having the management of them, can doubtless give full information on the subject. But besides all this, in order that the instrument may not be contested, I am anxious to give it the greatest possible authenticity. Therefore one of my colleagues will help me, and, contrary to custom, will assist in the dictation of the testament. Are you satisfied, sir? Continued the notary, addressing the old man. Yes, looked the invalid, his eye beaming with delight at the ready interpretation of his meaning. What is he going to do? Thought Villefort, whose position demanded much reserve, but who was longing to know what his father's intentions were. He left the room to give orders for another notary to be sent, but Bourrois, who had heard all that had passed, had guessed his master's wishes, and had already gone to fetch one. The procureur then told his wife to come up. In the course of a quarter of an hour everyone had assembled in the chamber of the paralytic. The second notary had also arrived. A few words sufficed for a mutual understanding between the 2 officers of the law, They read to Noirtier the formal copy of a will, in order to give him an idea of the terms in which documents are generally couched. Then, in order to test the capacity of the testator, the first notary said, turning towards him, "When an individual makes his will, it is generally in favor or in prejudice of some person." "Yes." "Have you an exact idea of the amount of your fortune?" "Yes." "I will name to you several sums which will increase by gradation. You will stop me when I reach the one representing the amount of your own possessions." "Yes." There was a kind of solemnity in this interrogation. Never had the struggle between mind and matter been more apparent than now, and if it was not a sublime, it was at least a curious spectacle. They had formed a circle round the invalid. The second notary was sitting at a table, prepared for writing, and his colleague was standing before the testator in the act of interrogating him on the subject to which we have alluded. "Your fortune exceeds 300,000 francs, does it not?" asked he. Noirtier made a sign that it did. "Do you possess 400,000 francs?" inquired the notary. Noirtier's eyes remained immovable. 500,000. The same expression continued. 600,000. 700,000. 800,000. 900,000. Noirtier stopped him at the last named sum. "You are then in possession of 900,000 francs?" asked the notary. "Yes." "In landed property?" "No." "In stock?" "Yes." "The stock is in your own hands?" The look which M. Noirtier cast on Boris showed that there was something wanting which he knew where to find. The old servant left the room, and presently returned, bringing with him a small casket. "Do you permit us to open this casket?" asked the notary. Noirtier gave his assent. They opened it, and found 900,000 francs in bank script. The first notary handed over each note as he examined it to his colleague. The total amount was found to be as M. Noirtier had stated. It is all as he had said. It is very evident that the mind still retains its full force and vigor. Then returning toward the paralytic, he said, "You possess then 900,000 francs of capital, which, according to the manner in which you have invested it, ought to bring in an income of about 40,000 livres." "Yes." "To whom do you desire to leave this fortune?" "Oh," said Madame de Villefort, "there is not much doubt on the subject. M. Noirtier tenderly loves his granddaughter, Mademoiselle de Villefort. It is she who has nursed and tended him for 6 years, and has, by her devoted attention, fully secured the affection, I had almost said the gratitude, of her grandfather, and it is but just that she should reap the fruit of her devotion." The eye of Noirtier clearly showed by its expression that he was not deceived by the false assent given by Madame de Villefort's words and manner to the motives which she supposed him to entertain. "Is it then to Mademoiselle Valentine de Villefort that you leave these 900,000 francs?" demanded the notary. Thinking he had only to insert this clause, but waiting first for the assent of Noirtier, which it was necessary should be given before all the witnesses of the singular scene. Valentine, when her name was made the subject of discussion, had stepped back to escape unpleasant observation. Her eyes were cast down. She was crying. The old man looked at her for an instant with an expression of the deepest tenderness. Then, turning towards the notary, he significantly winked his eye in token of dissent. "What," said the notary, "do you not intend making Mademoiselle Valentine de Villefort your residuary legatee?" "No." "You are not making any mistake, are you?" said the notary. "You really mean to declare that such is not your intention?" "No," repeated Noirtier, "no." Valentine raised her head, struck dumb with astonishment. It was not so much the conviction that she was disinherited that caused her grief, but her total inability to account for the feelings which had provoked her grandfather to such an act. But Noirtier looked at her with so much affectionate tenderness that she exclaimed, "Oh, grandpapa, I see now that it is only your fortune of which you deprive me. You still leave me the love which I have always enjoyed." "Ah, yes, most assuredly," said the eyes of the paralytic, for he closed them with an expression which Valentine could not mistake. Thank you, murmured she. The old man's declaration that Valentine was not the destined inheritor of his fortune had excited the hopes of Madame de Villefort. She gradually approached the invalid and said, "Then doubtless, dear M. Noirtier, you intend leaving your fortune to your grandson, Edward de Villefort." The winking of the eyes, which assured this speech was most decided and terrible, and expressed a feeling almost amounting to hatred. "No," said the notary. "Then perhaps it is to your son, M. de Villefort." "No." The two notaries looked at each other in mute astonishment and inquiry as to what were the real intentions of the testator. Villefort and his wife both grew red, one from shame, the other from anger. "What have we all done, then, dear grandpapa?" said Valentine. "You no longer seem to love any of us." The old man's eyes passed rapidly from Villefort to his wife, and rested on Valentine with a look of unutterable fondness. "Well," said she, "if you love me, grandpapa, try and bring that love to bear upon your actions at this present moment. You know me well enough to be quite sure that I have never thought of your fortune, and besides, they say I am already rich in right of my mother, too rich even. Explain yourself, then." Noirtier fixed his intelligent eyes on Valentine's hand. "My hand?" said she. "Yes." "Her hand!" exclaimed everyone. "Oh, gentlemen, you see it is all useless, and that my father's mind is really impaired," said Villefort. "Ah," cried Valentine suddenly, "I understand. It is my marriage you mean, is it not, dear grandpapa?" "Yes, yes, yes," sighed the paralytic, casting on Valentine a look of joyful gratitude for having guessed his meaning. "You're angry with us all on account of this marriage, are you not?" "Yes." "Really, this is too absurd," said Villefort. "Excuse me, sir," replied the notary. "On the contrary, the meaning of M. Noirtier is quite evident to me, and I can quite easily connect the train of ideas passing in his mind." "You do not wish me to marry M. Franz d'Épinay?" observed Valentine. "I do not wish it," said the eye of her grandfather. "And you disinherit your granddaughter," continued the notary, "because she has contracted an engagement contrary to your wishes?" "Yes." "So that, but for this marriage, she would have been your heir?" "Yes." There was a profound silence. The two notaries were holding a consultation as to the best means of proceeding with the affair. Valentine was looking at her grandfather with a smile of intense gratitude, and Villefort was biting his lips with vexation, while Madame de Villefort could not succeed in repressing an inward feeling of joy, which, in spite of herself, appeared in her whole countenance. "But," said Villefort, who was the first to break the silence, "I consider that I am the best judge of the propriety of the marriage in question. I am the only person possessing the right to dispose of my daughter's hand. It is my wish that she should marry M. Franz d'Épinay, and she shall marry him." Valentine sank, weeping, into a chair. "Sir," said the notary, "how do you intend disposing of your fortune in case Mademoiselle de Villefort still determines on marrying M. Franz?" The old man gave no answer. "You will, of course, dispose of it in some way or another?" "Yes." "In favor of some member of your family?" "No." "Do you intend devoting it to charitable purposes, then?" pursued the notary. "Yes." "But," said the notary, "you are aware that the law does not allow a son to be entirely deprived of his patrimony?" "Yes." "You only intend, then, to dispose of that part of your fortune which the law allows you to subtract from the inheritance of your son?" Noirtier made no answer. "Do you still wish to dispose of all?" Yes. But they will contest the will after your death. No. My father knows me, replied Villefort. He is quite sure that his wishes will be held sacred by me. Besides, he understands that in my position I cannot plead against the poor. The eye of Noirtier beamed with triumph. What do you decide on, sir? Asked the notary of Villefort. Nothing, sir. It is a resolution which my father has taken, and I know he never alters his mind. I am quite resigned. These 900,000 francs will go out of the family in order to enrich some hospital, but it is ridiculous thus to yield to the caprices of an old man, and I shall therefore act according to my conscience. Having said this, Villefort quitted the room with his wife, leaving his father at liberty to do as he pleased. The same day the will was made, the witnesses were brought. It was approved by the old man, sealed in the presence of all, and given in charge to M. de Champs, the family notary. End of chapter 59. This recording by Wild Alaska, Anchorage, Alaska, May 2012.
Of the Count of Monte Cristo. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Arlene Stebbins. The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 60. The Telegraph. Monsieur and Madame de Villefort found on their return that the Count of Monte Cristo, who had come to visit them in their absence, had been ushered into the drawing-room and was still awaiting them there. Madame de Villefort, who had not yet sufficiently recovered from her late emotion to allow of her entertaining visitors so immediately, retired to her bedroom, while the procureur, who could better depend upon himself, proceeded at once to the salon. Although M. de Villefort flattered himself that, to all outward view, he had completely masked the feelings which were passing in his mind, he did not know that the cloud was still lowering on his brow, so much so that the count, whose smile was radiant, immediately noticed his sombre and thoughtful air. "Ma foi," said Monte Cristo after the first compliments were over, "what is the matter with you, M. de Villefort? Have I arrived at the moment when you were drawing up an indictment for a capital crime?" Villefort tried to smile. "No, count," he replied, "I am the only victim in this case. It is I who lose my cause, and it is ill luck, obstinacy, and folly which have caused it to be decided against me." "To what do you refer?" said Monte Cristo, with a well-feigned interest. "Have you really met with some great misfortune?" "Oh, no, monsieur," said Villefort, with a bitter smile. "It is only a loss of money which I have sustained, nothing worth mentioning, I assure you." "True," said Monte Cristo, "the loss of a sum of money becomes almost immaterial with a fortune such as you possess, and to one of your philosophic spirit." "It is not so much the loss of money that vexes me," said Villefort, "though, after all, 900,000 francs are worth regretting; but I am the more annoyed with this fate, chance, or whatever you please to call the power which has destroyed my hopes and my fortune, and may blast the prospects of my child also, as it is all occasioned by an old man relapsed into second childhood." "What do you say?" said the count. 900,000 francs? It is indeed a sum which might be regretted even by a philosopher. And who is the cause of all this annoyance?" "My father, as I told you." "Monsieur Noirtier? But I thought you told me he had become entirely paralyzed, and that all his faculties were completely destroyed." "Yes, his bodily faculties, for he can neither move nor speak. Nevertheless, he thinks, acts, and wills in the manner I have described. I left him about 5 minutes ago, and he is now occupied in dictating his will to 2 notaries." "But to do this he must have spoken." "He has done better than that, he has made himself understood." "How was such a thing possible?" by the help of his eyes, which are still full of life, and, as you perceive, possess the power of inflicting mortal injury. "My dear," said Madame de Villefort, who had just entered the room, "perhaps you exaggerate the evil." "Good morning, madame," said the count, bowing. Madame de Villefort acknowledged the salutation with one of her most gracious smiles. "What is this that M. de Villefort has been telling me?" demanded Monte Cristo, "and what incomprehensible misfortune—" "Incomprehensible is not the word," interrupted the procureur, shrugging his shoulders. "It is an old man's caprice." "And there is no means of making him revoke his decision?" "Yes," said Madame de Villefort, "and it is still entirely in the power of my husband to cause the will, which is now in prejudice of Valentine, to be altered in her favor." The count, who perceived that M. and Madame de Villefort were beginning to speak in parables, appeared to pay no attention to the conversation, and feigned to be busily engaged in watching Edward, who was mischievously pouring some ink into the bird's water-glass. "My dear," said Villefort, in answer to his wife, "you know I have never been accustomed to play the patriarch in my family, nor have I ever considered the fate of a universe was to be decided by my nod. Nevertheless, it is necessary that my will should be respected in my family, and that the folly of an old man and the caprice of a child should not be allowed to overturn a project which I have entertained for so many years. The Baron d'Épinay was my friend, as you know, and an alliance with his son is the most suitable thing that could possibly be arranged." "Do you think," said Madame de Villefort, "that Valentine is in league with him? She has always been opposed to this marriage, and I should not be at all surprised if what we have just seen and heard is nothing but the execution of a plan concerted between them." "Madame," said Villefort, "believe me, a fortune of 900,000 francs is not so easily renounced." "She could, nevertheless, make up her mind to renounce the world, sir, since it is only about a year ago that she herself proposed entering a convent." "Never mind," replied Villefort, "I say that this marriage shall be consummated." "Notwithstanding your father's wishes to the contrary?" said Madame de Villefort, selecting a new point of attack. "That is a serious thing." Monte Cristo, who pretended not to be listening, heard, however, every word that was said. "Madame," replied Villefort, "I can truly say that I have always entertained a high respect for my father, because to the natural feeling of relationship was added the consciousness of his moral superiority. The name of father is sacred in two senses: he should be reverenced as the author of our being, and as a master whom we ought to obey. But under the present circumstances I am justified in doubting the wisdom of an old man who, because he hated the father, vents his anger on the son. It would be ridiculous in me to regulate my conduct by such caprices. I shall still continue to preserve the same respect toward M. Noirtier. I will suffer, without complaint, the pecuniary deprivation to which he has subjected me, but I shall remain firm in my determination, and the world shall see which party has reason on his side. Consequently, I shall marry my daughter to the Baron Franz d'Épinay, because I consider it would be a proper and eligible match for her to make, and, in short, because I choose to bestow my daughter's hand on whomever I please." "What?" said the count, the approbation of whose eye Villefort had frequently solicited during this speech. "What? Do you say that M. Noirtier disinherits Mademoiselle de Villefort because she was going to marry M. le Baron Franz d'Épinay?" "Yes, sir, that is the reason," said Villefort, shrugging his shoulders. "The apparent reason, at least," said Madame de Villefort. "The real reason, madame, I can assure you. I know my father." "But I want to know in what way M. d'Épinay can have displeased your father more than any other person." "I believe I know M. Franz d'Épinay," said the count. "Is he not the son of General de Quesnel, who was created Baron d'Épinay by Charles X.?" "The same," said Villefort. "Well, but he is a charming young man, according to my ideas." "He is, which makes me believe that it is only an excuse of M. Noirtier to prevent his granddaughter marrying. Old men are always so selfish in their affection," said Madame de Villefort. "But," said Monte Cristo, Do you not know any cause for his hatred?" "Ah, ma foi! Who is to know?" "Perhaps it is some political difference?" "My father and the Baron d'Épinay lived in the stormy times of which I only saw the ending," said Villefort. "Was not your father a Bonapartist?" asked Monte Cristo. "I think I remember you told me something of that kind." "My father has been a Jacobin more than anything else," said Villefort, carried by his emotion beyond the bounds of prudence; "and the senator's robe which Napoleon cast on his shoulders served only to disguise the old man without in any degree changing him. When my father conspired, it was not for the emperor, it was against the Bourbons. For M. Noirtier possessed this peculiarity: he never projected any utopian schemes which could never be realized, but strove for possibilities, and he applied to the realization of those possibilities the terrible theories of the Mountain, theories that never shrank from any means that were deemed necessary to bring about the desired result." "Well," said Monte Cristo, "it is just as I thought. It was politics which brought Noirtier and M. d'Épinay into personal contact. Although General d'Épinay served under Napoleon, did he not still retain royalist sentiments? And was he not the person who was assassinated one evening, leaving a Bonapartist meeting to which he had been invited on the supposition that he favored the cause of the emperor?" Villefort looked at the count almost with terror. "Am I mistaken, then?" said Monte Cristo. "No, sir, the facts are precisely what you have stated," said Madame de Villefort, "and it was to prevent the renewal of old feuds that M. de Villefort formed the idea of uniting in the bonds of affection the two children of these inveterate enemies." "It was a sublime and charitable thought," said Monte Cristo, "and the whole world should applaud it. It would be noble to see Mademoiselle Noirtier de Villefort assuming the title of Madame France d'Épinay." Villefort shuddered and looked at Monte Cristo as if he wished to read in his countenance the real feelings which had dictated the words he had just uttered. But the count completely baffled the procureur, and prevented him from discovering anything beneath the never varying smile he was so constantly in the habit of assuming. "Although," said Villefort, "it will be a serious thing for Valentine to lose her grandfather's fortune, I do not think that M. d'Épinay will be frightened at this pecuniary loss. He will, perhaps, hold me in greater esteem than the money itself, seeing that I sacrifice everything in order to keep my word with him. Besides, he knows that Valentine is rich in right of her mother, and that she will in all probability inherit the fortune of M. and Madame de Saint Méran, her mother's parents, who both love her tenderly." "And who are fully as well worth loving and tending as M. Noirtier," said Madame de Villefort. "Besides, they are to come to Paris in about a month, and Valentine, after the affront she has received, need not consider it necessary to continue to bury herself alive by being shut up with M. Noirtier." The count listened with satisfaction to this tale of wounded self-love and defeated ambition. "But it seems to me," said Monte Cristo, "and I must begin by asking your pardon for what I am about to say, that if M. Noirtier disinherits Mademoiselle de Villefort because she is going to marry a man whose father he detested, he cannot have the same cause of complaint against this dear Edward." "True," said Madame de Villefort, with an intonation of voice which it is impossible to describe. "Is it not unjust, shamefully unjust? Poor Edward is as much M. Noirtier's grandchild as Valentine, and yet, if she had not been going to marry M. France, M. Noirtier would have left her all his money, and supposing Valentine to be disinherited by her grandfather, she will still be 3 times richer than he." The count listened and said no more. "Count," said Villefort, "we will not entertain you any longer with our family misfortunes. It is true that my patrimony will go to endow charitable institutions, and my father will have deprived me of my lawful inheritance without reason for doing so; but I shall have the satisfaction of knowing that I have acted like a man of sense and feeling. M. d'Épinay, to whom I had promised the interest of this sum, shall receive it, even if I endure the most cruel privations." "However," said Madame de Villefort, returning to the one idea which incessantly occupied her mind, Perhaps it would be better to explain this unlucky affair to Monsieur d'Épinay, in order to give him the opportunity of himself renouncing his claim to the hand of Mademoiselle de Villefort." "Ah, that would be a great pity," said Villefort. "A great pity," said Monte Cristo. "Undoubtedly," said Villefort, moderating the tones of his voice, "a marriage once concerted and then broken off throws a sort of discredit upon a young lady. Then again, the old reports which I was so anxious to put an end to will instantly gain ground. No, it will all go well. Monsieur d'Épinay, if he is an honorable man, will consider himself more than ever pledged to Mademoiselle de Villefort, unless he were actuated by a decided feeling of avarice, but that is impossible." "I agree with Monsieur de Villefort," said Monte Cristo, fixing his eyes on Madame de Villefort, "and if I were sufficiently intimate with him to allow of giving my advice, I would persuade him, since I have been told Monsieur d'Épinay is coming back, to settle this affair once beyond all possibility of revocation. I will answer for the success of a project which will reflect so much honor on Monsieur de Villefort." The procureur arose, delighted with the proposition, but his wife slightly changed color. "Well, that is all I wanted, and I will be guided by a counselor such as you are," said he, extending his hand to Monte Cristo. "Therefore let everyone here look upon what has passed today as if it had not happened, and as though we had never thought of such a thing as a change in our original plans." "Sir," said the count, "the world, unjust as it is, will be pleased with your resolution. Your friends will be proud of you, and Monsieur d'Épinay, even if he took Mademoiselle de Villefort without any dowry, which he will not do, would be delighted with the idea of entering a family which could make such sacrifices in order to keep a promise and fulfill a duty." At the conclusion of these words the count rose to depart. "Are you going to leave us, count?" said Madame de Villefort. "I am sorry to say I must do so, madame. I only came to remind you of your promise for Saturday." "Did you fear we should forget it?" "You are very good, madame, but Monsieur de Villefort has so many important and urgent occupations." "My husband has given me his word, sir," said Madame de Villefort. "You have just seen him resolve to keep it when he has everything to lose, and surely there is more reason for his doing so where he has everything to gain." "And," said Villefort, "is it at your house in the Champs Élysées that you receive visitors?" "No," said Monte Cristo, "which is precisely the reason which renders your kindness more meritorious. It is in the country." "In the country?" "Yes." "Where is it, then? Near Paris, is it not?" "Very near, only half a league from the barriers. It is at Auteuil." "At Auteuil?" said Villefort. "True. Madame de Villefort told me you lived at Auteuil, since it was to your house that she was taken. And in what part of Auteuil do you reside?" "Rue de la Fontaine." "Rue de la Fontaine!" exclaimed Villefort in an agitated tone. "At what number?" "Number 28." "Then," cried Villefort, "it was you who bought M. de Saint Méran's house." "Did it belong to M. de Saint Méran?" demanded Monte Cristo. "Yes," replied Madame de Villefort; "and would you believe it, count?" "Believe what?" "You think this house is pretty, do you not?" "I think it charming." "Well, my husband would never live in it." "Indeed," returned Monte Cristo, "that is a prejudice on your part, M. de Villefort, for which I am at quite a loss to account." "I do not like Auteuil, sir," said the procureur, making an evident effort to appear calm. "But I hope you will not carry your antipathy so far as to deprive me of the pleasure of your company, sir," said Monte Cristo. "No, count, I assure you I shall do my best," stammered Villefort. "Oh," said Monte Cristo, "I allow of no excuse. On Saturday, at 6 o'clock. I shall be expecting you, and if you fail to come, I shall think, for how do I know to the contrary, that this house, which has remained uninhabited for 20 years, must have some gloomy tradition or dreadful legend connected with it." "I will come, count, I will be sure to come," said Villefort eagerly. "Thank you," said Monte Cristo. "Now you must permit me to take my leave of you." "You said before that you were obliged to leave us, monsieur," said Madame de Villefort, "and you were about to tell us why when your attention was called to some other subject." "Indeed, madame," said Monte Cristo, "I scarcely know if I dare tell you where I am going." "Nonsense! Say on." Well, then it is to see a thing on which I have sometimes mused for hours together." "What is it?" "A telegraph. So now I've told my secret." "A telegraph?" repeated Madame de Villefort. "Yes, a telegraph. I had often seen one placed at the end of a road on a hillock, and in the light of the sun its black arms, bending in every direction, always reminded me of the claws of an immense beetle, and I assure you it was never without emotion that I gazed on it, for I could not help thinking how wonderful it was that these various signs should be made to cleave the air with such precision as to convey to the distance of 300 leagues the ideas and wishes of a man sitting at a table on one end of the line, to another man similarly placed at the opposite extremity, and all this effected by a simple act of volition on the part of the sender of the message. I began to think of genii, sylphs, gnomes, in short, of all the ministers of the occult sciences, until I laughed aloud at the freaks of my own imagination. Now it never occurred to me to wish for a nearer inspection of these large insects with their long black claws, for I always feared to find under their stone wings some little human genius fagged to death with cabals, factions, and government intrigues. But one fine day I learned that the mover of this telegraph was only a poor wretch, hired for 1,200 francs a year, and employed all day not in studying the heavens like an astronomer, or in gazing on the water like an angler, or even in enjoying the privilege of observing the country around him, but all his monotonous life was passed in watching his white-bellied, black-clawed fellow insect 4 or 5 leagues distant from him. At length I felt a desire to study this living chrysalis more closely, and to endeavor to understand the secret part played by these insect actors when they occupy themselves simply with pulling different pieces of string. "And are you going there?" "I am." "What telegraph do you intend visiting? That of the Home Department or of the Observatory?" "Oh, no, I should find there people who would force me to understand things of which I would prefer to remain ignorant, and who would try to explain to me, in spite of myself, a mystery which even they do not understand. Ma foi, I should wish to keep my illusions concerning insects unimpaired. It is quite enough to have those dissipated which I had formed of my fellow creatures. I shall, therefore, not visit either of these telegraphs, but one in the open country, where I shall find a good-natured simpleton who knows no more than the machine he is employed to work." "You are a singular man," said Villefort. "What line would you advise me to study?" "The one that is in most use just at this time." "The Spanish one, you mean, I suppose?" "Yes. Should you like a letter to the minister that they might explain to you—" "No," said Monte Cristo, "as I told you before, I do not wish to comprehend it. The moment I understand it, there will no longer exist a telegraph for me. It will be nothing more than a sign from M. du Châtel or from M. Montalivet, transmitted to the prefect of Bayonne, mystified by 2 Greek words, tele, graphein. It is the insect with black claws and the awful word which I wish to retain in my imagination in all its purity and all its importance." "Go, then, for in the course of 2 hours it will be dark, and you will not be able to see anything." "Ma foi, you frighten me. Which is the nearest way? Bayonne?" "Yes, the road to Bayonne." "And afterwards the road to Châtillon?" "Yes." "By the tower of Montlhéry, you mean?" "Yes." "Thank you. Good-bye. On Saturday I will tell you my impressions concerning the telegraph." At the door the count was met by the 2 notaries who had just completed the act which was to disinherit Valentine, and who were leaving under the conviction of having done a thing which could not fail of redounding considerably to their credit. Chapter 60. Recording by Arlene Stebbins, Seattle, Washington.
Of the Count of Monte Cristo. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Kristingj. The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 61. How a Gardener may get rid of the Dormice. Not on the same night, as he had intended, but the next morning, the Count of Monte Cristo went out by the Barrière d'Enfants, taking the road to Orleans. Leaving the village of Linas, without stopping at the telegraph, which flourished its great bony arms as he passed, the count reached the Tower of Montlhéry, situated, as everyone knows, upon the highest point of the plain of that name. At the foot of the hill the count dismounted and began to ascend by a little winding path, about 18 inches wide. When he reached the summit, he found himself stopped by a hedge, upon which green fruit had succeeded to red and white flowers. Monte Cristo looked for the entrance to the enclosure, and was not long in finding a little wooden gate, working on willow hinges, and fastened with a nail and string. The count soon mastered the mechanism, the gate opened, and he then found himself in a little garden, about 20 feet long by 12 wide, bounded on one side by part of the hedge, which contained the ingenious contrivance we have called a gate, and on the other by the old tower, covered with ivy and studded with wallflowers. No one would have thought, in looking at this old, weather-beaten, floral-decked tower, which might be likely to an elderly dame dressed up to receive her grandchildren at a birthday feast, that it would have been capable of telling strange things, if, in addition to the menacing ears which the proverb says all walls are provided with, it had also a voice. The garden was crossed by a path of red gravel, edged by a border of thick box, of many years' growth, and of a tone and colour that would have delighted the heart of Delacroix, our modern Rubens. This path was formed in the shape of the figure of 8, thus, in its windings, making a walk of 60 feet in a garden of only 20. Never had Flora, the fresh and smiling goddess of gardeners, been honoured with a purer or more scrupulous worship than that which was paid to her in this little enclosure. In fact, of the 20 rose trees which form the parterre, not only bore the mark of the slug, nor were there evidences anywhere of the clustering aphis, which is so destructive to plants growing in a damp soil. And yet it was not because the damp had been excluded from the garden. The earth, black as soot, the thick foliage of the trees betrayed its presence. Besides, had natural humidity been wanting, it could have been immediately supplied by artificial means, thanks to a tank of water, sunk in one of the corners of the garden, and upon which were stationed a frog and a toad, who, from antipathy, no doubt, always remained on the 2 opposite sides of the basin. There was not a blade of grass to be seen in the paths, or a weed in the flower-beds. No fine lady ever trained and watered her geraniums, her cacti, and her rhododendrons with more pains than this hitherto unseen gardener bestowed upon his little enclosure. Monte Cristo stopped after having closed the gate, and fastened the string to the nail, and cast a look around. "The man at the telegraph," said he, "must either engage a gardener or devote himself passionately to agriculture." Suddenly he struck against something crouching behind a wheelbarrow filled with leaves. The something rose, uttering an exclamation of astonishment, and Monte Cristo found himself facing a man about 50 years old, who was plucking strawberries, which he was placing upon grape leaves. He had 12 leaves and about as many strawberries, which, on rising suddenly, he let fall from his hand. "You are gathering your crop, sir?" said Monte Cristo, smiling. "Excuse me, sir," replied the man, raising his hand to his cap. "I am not up here, I know, but I have only just come down." "Do not let me interfere with you in anything, my friend," said the count. "Gather your strawberries, if indeed there are any left." "I have 10 left," said the man, "for here are 11, and I had 22, 5 more than last year. But I am not surprised. The spring has been warm this year, and strawberries require heat, sir. This is the reason that, instead of the 16 I had last year, I have this year, you see, 11, already plucked. 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. Ah, I missed 3. They were here last night, sir. I am sure they were here. I counted them. It must be the Mayor Simon's son who has stolen them. I saw him strolling about here this morning. Ah, the young rascal! Stealing in a garden. He does not know where that may lead him to." "Certainly it is wrong," said Monte Cristo, "but you should take into consideration the youth and greediness of the delinquent." "Of course," said the gardener, "but that does not make it less unpleasant. But, sir, once more I beg pardon, perhaps you are an officer and I am detaining here." And he glanced timidly at the count's blue coat. "Calm yourself, my friend," said the count, with the smile which he made at will either terrible or benevolent, and which now expressed only the kindliest feeling. "I am not an inspector, but a traveller, brought here by a curiosity he half repents of, since he causes you to lose your time." "Ah, my time is not valuable," replied the man with a melancholy smile. "Still it belongs to government, and I ought not to waste it. But, having received the signal that I might rest for an hour," here he glanced at the sun-dial, for there was everything in the enclosure of Montlhéry, even a sun-dial, "and having 10 minutes before me, and my strawberries being ripe, when a day longer— By the by, sir, do you think dormice eat them?" "I should think so," replied Monte Cristo. "Dormice are bad neighbors for us who do not eat them preserved, as the Romans did." "What, did the Romans eat them?" said the gardener. "Ate dormice?" "I have read so in Petronius," said the count. "Really? They can't be nice, though they do say as fat as a dormouse. It is not a wonder that they are fat, sleeping all day and only waking to eat all night. Listen, last year I had 4 apricots. They stole one, I had 1 nectarine, only 1. Well, sir, they ate half of it on the wall, a splendid nectarine, I never ate a better." "You ate it?" "That is to say, the half that was left. You understand, it was exquisite, sir. Ah, those gentlemen never choose the worst morsels, like Mayor Simonson, who has not chosen the worst strawberries. But this year," continued the horticulturist, "I'll take care it shall not happen, even if I should be forced to sit by the whole night to watch them when the strawberries are ripe." Monte Cristo had seen enough. Every man has a devouring passion in his heart, as every fruit has its worm. That of the telegraph man was horticulture. He began gathering the grape leaves which screened the sun from the grapes, and won the heart of the gardener. "Did you come here, sir, to see the telegraph?" he said. "Yes, if it isn't contrary to the rules." "Oh, no," said the gardener, "not in the least, since there is no danger that anyone can possibly understand what we are saying." "I have been told," said the count, "that you do not always yourself understand the signals you repeat." "That is true, sir, and that is what I like best," said the man, smiling. "Why do you like that best?" "Because then I have no responsibility. I am a machine then, and nothing else, and so long as I work, nothing more is required of me." "Is it possible," said Monte Cristo to himself, "that I can have met with a man that has no ambition? That would spoil my plans." "Sir," said the gardener, glancing at the sun-dial, "the 10 minutes are almost up. I must return to my post. Will you go up with me?" "I follow you." Monte Cristo entered the tower, which was divided in 3 stories. The tower contained implements, such as spades, rakes, watering pots, hung against the wall. This was all the furniture. The second was the man's conventional abode, or rather sleeping place. It contained a few poor articles of household furniture, a bed, a table, 2 chairs, a stone pitcher, and some dry herbs, hung up to the ceiling, which the count recognized as sweet peas, and of which the good man was preserving the seeds. He had labelled them with as much care as if he had been master botanist in the Jardin des Plantes. "Does it require much study to learn the art of telegraphing?" asked Monte Cristo. "The study does not take long. It was acting as a supernumerary that was so tedious." "And what is the pay?" 1,000 francs, sir." "It is nothing." "No, but then we are lodged, as you perceive." Monte Cristo looked at the room. They passed to the 3rd story. It was the telegraph room. Monte Cristo looked in turn at the 2 iron handles by which the machine was worked. "It is very interesting," he said, "but it must be very tedious for a lifetime." "Yes, at first my neck was cramped with looking at it, but at the end of a year I became used to it, and then we have our hours of recreation and our holidays." Holidays? Yes. When? When we have a fog. Ah, to be sure. Those are indeed holidays to me. I go into the garden, I plant, I prune, I trim, I kill the insects all day long. How long have you been here? 10 years, and 5 as a supernumerary make 15. You are 55 years old. How long must you have served to claim the pension? Oh, sir, 25 years. And how much is the pension? 100 crowns. Poor humanity, murmured Monte Cristo. What did you say, sir? Asked the man. I am saying it was very interesting. What was? All you were showing me. And you really understand none of these signals? None at all. And have you ever tried to understand them? Never. Why should I? But still there are some signals only addressed to you. Certainly. And do you understand them? They are always the same. And they mean, nothing new, you have an hour, or tomorrow. This is simple enough, said the count. But look, is not your correspondent putting itself in motion? Ah, yes. Thank you, sir. And what is it saying? Anything you understand? Yes, it asks if I am ready. And you reply? By the same sign, which at the same time tells my right-hand correspondent that I am ready, while it gives notice to my left-hand correspondent to prepare in his turn. It is very ingenious, said the count. You will see, said the man proudly. In 5 minutes he will speak. I have then 5 minutes, said Monte Cristo to himself. It is more time than I require. My dear sir, will you allow me to ask you a question? What is it, sir? You are fond of gardening? Passionately. And you would be pleased to have, instead of this terrace of 20 feet, an enclosure of 2 acres? Sir, I would make a terrestrial paradise of it. You live badly on your 1,000 francs? Badly enough, but yet I do live. Yes, but you have a wretchedly small garden. True, the garden is not large. And, then, such as it is filled with dormice, who eat everything. Ah, they are my scourges. Tell me, should you have the misfortune to turn your head while your right-hand correspondent was telegraphing? I should not see him. Then what would happen? I could not repeat the signals. And then? Not having repeated them, through negligence, I should be fined. How much? 100 francs. A tenth of your income, that would be fine work. Ah, said the man. Has it ever happened to you? Said Monte Cristo. Once, sir, when I was grafting a rose tree. Well, suppose you were to alter a signal, and substitute another. Ah, that is another case. I should be turned off, and lose my pension. 300 francs. 100 crowns, yes, sir. So you see that I am not likely to do any of these things. Not even for 15 years' wages? Come, it is worth thinking about. For 15,000 francs? Yes. Sir, you alarm me. Nonsense. Sir, are you tempting me? Just so. 15,000 francs, do you understand? Sir, let me see my right-hand correspondent. On the contrary, do not look at him, but at this. What is it? What, do you not know these bits of paper? Banknotes. Exactly. There are 15 of them. And whose are they? Yours, if you like. Mine? Exclaimed the man, half suffocated. Yes, yours, your own property. Sir, my right-hand correspondent is signaling. Let him signal. Sir, you have distracted me. I shall be fined. That will cost you 100 francs. You see it is your interest to take my banknotes. Sir, my right-hand correspondent redoubles his signals. He is impatient. Never mind. Take these. And the count placed the packet in the man's hands. Now this is not all, he said. You cannot live upon your 15,000 francs. I shall still have my place. No, you will lose it, for you are going to alter your correspondent's message." "Oh, sir, what are you proposing?" "A jest." "Sir, unless you force me." "I think I can effectually force you." And Monte Cristo drew another packet from his pocket. "Here are 10,000 more francs," he said. "With the 15,000 already in your pocket, they will make 25,000. With 5,000 you can buy a pretty little house with 2 acres of land. The remaining 20,000 will bring you in 1,000 francs a year." "A garden with 2 acres of land!" "And 1,000 francs a year." "Oh, heavens!" "Come, take them." And Monte Cristo forced the bank notes into his hand. "What am I to do?" "Nothing very difficult."
"But what is it?"
"To repeat these signs." Monte Cristo took a paper from his pocket, upon which were drawn 3 signs, with numbers to indicate the order in which they were to be worked. "There, you see it will not take long." "Yes, but——" "Do this, and you will have nectarines and all the rest." The shot told, red with fever, while the large drops fell from his brow. The man executed, one after the other, the 3 signs given by the count, in spite of the frightful contortions of right-hand correspondent, who, not understanding the change, began to think the gardener had gone mad. As to the left-hand one, he conscientiously repeated the same signals, which were finally transmitted to the minister of the interior. "Now you are rich," said Monte Cristo. "Yes," replied the man, "but at what a price!" "Listen, friend," said Monte Cristo, "I do not wish to cause you any remorse. Believe me, then, when I swear to you that you have wronged no man, but on the contrary have benefited mankind." The man looked at the bank notes, felt them, counted them, turned pale, then red, then rushed into his room to drink a glass of water, but he had no time to reach the water jug, and fainted in the midst of his dried herbs. 5 minutes after the new telegram reached the minister, Debray had the horses put to his carriage, and drove to Danglars' house. "Has your husband any Spanish bonds?" he asked of the baroness. "I think so, indeed; he has 6 millions worth." "You must sell them at whatever price." "Why?" "Because Don Carlos has fled from Bourges, and has returned to Spain." "How do you know?" Debray shrugged his shoulders. "The idea of asking how I hear the news," he said. The baroness did not wait for repetition. She ran to her husband, who immediately hastened to his agent, and ordered him to sell at any price. When it was seen that Danglars sold, the Spanish funds fell directly. Danglars lost 500,000 francs, but he rid himself of all his Spanish shares. The same evening the following was read in Le Messager, by telegraph: "The king, Don Carlos, has escaped the vigilance of his guardians at Bourges, and has returned to Spain by the Catalonian frontier. Barcelona has risen in his favor." All that evening nothing was spoken of but the foresight of Danglars, who had sold his shares, and of all the luck of the stock jobber, who only lost 500,000 francs by such a blow. Those who had kept their shares, or bought those of Danglars, looked upon themselves as ruined, and passed a very bad night. Next morning Le Noirtier contained the following: "It was without any foundation that Le Messager, yesterday, announced the flight of Don Carlos and the revolt of Barcelona. The king, Don Carlos, has not left Bourges, and the peninsula is in the enjoyment of profound peace. A telegraphic signal, improperly interpreted, owing to the fog, was the cause of this error. The funds rose 1% higher than before they had fallen. This, reckoning his loss, and what he had missed gaining, made the difference of 1,000,000 to Danglars." "Good," said Monte Cristo to Morrel, who was at his house when the news arrived of the strange reverse of fortune of which Danglars had been the victim. "I have just made a discovery for 25,000 francs, for which I would have paid 100,000. "What have you discovered?" asked Morrel. "I have just discovered how a gardener may get rid of the dormice that eat his peaches." Chapter 62. Recording by Kristingj in Oslo, Norway. The 4th of March, 2012.
The Count of Monte Cristo. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by David R. Miller. The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 62. Ghosts. At first sight, the exterior of the house at Auteuil gave no indications of splendor, nothing one would expect from the destined residence of the magnificent Count of Monte Cristo. But this simplicity was according to the will of its master, who positively ordered nothing to be altered outside the house. The splendor was within. Indeed, almost before the door opened, the scene changed. Monsieur Bertuccio had outdone himself in the taste displayed in furnishing, and in the rapidity from which it was executed. It is told that the Duc d'Antin removed in a single night a whole avenue of trees that annoyed Louis XIV. In 3 days, Monsieur Bertuccio planted an entirely bare court with poplars, large spreading sycamores to shade the different parts of the house, and in the foreground, instead of the usual paving stones, half hidden by the grass, there extended a lawn but that morning laid down, and upon which the water was yet glistening. For the rest, the orders had been issued by the Count. He himself had given a plan to Bertuccio, marking the spots where each tree was to be planted, and the shape and the extent of the lawn, which was to take the place of the paving stones. Thus the house had become unrecognizable, and Bertuccio himself declared that he scarcely knew it, encircled as it was by a framework of trees. The overseer would not have objected, while he was about it, to have made some improvements in the garden, but the Count had positively forbidden it to be touched. Bertuccio made amends, however, by loading the antechambers, staircases, and mantelpieces with flowers. What, above all, manifested the shrewdness of the steward, and the profound science of the master, the one in carrying out the ideas of the other, was that this house, which appeared only the night before so sad and gloomy, impregnated with that sickly smell one can only fancy to be the smell of time, had in a single day acquired the aspect of life, was scented with its master's favorite perfumes, and the very light regulated according to his wish. When the Count arrived, he had under his touch his books and arms. His eyes rested upon his favorite pictures. His dogs, whose caresses he loved, welcomed him in the antechamber. The birds, whose songs delighted him, cheered him with their music, and the house, awakened from its long sleep, like the sleeping beauty in the wood, lived, sang, and bloomed like the houses we've long cherished, and in which, when we are forced to leave them, we leave a part of our souls. The servants passed gaily along the fine courtyard, some belonging to the kitchens, gliding down the stairs, restored but the previous day, as if they had always inhabited the house; others filling the coach-houses, where the equipages, encased and numbered, appeared to have been installed for the last 50 years, and in the stables the horses replied with neighs to the grooms, who spoke to them with much more respect than many servants their masters. The library was divided into 2 parts on either side of the wall, and contained upwards of 2,000 volumes. One division was entirely devoted to novels, and even the volume which had been published but the day before was to be seen in its place in all the dignity of its red and gold binding. On the other side of the house, to match with the library, the conservatory, ornamented with rare flowers that bloomed in china jars, and in the midst of the greenhouse, marvelous alike to sight and smell, was a billiard table which looked as if it had been abandoned during the past hour by players who had left the balls on the cloth. One chamber alone had been respected by the magnificent Bertuccio. Before this room, to which you could ascend by the grand, and go out by the back staircase, the servants passed with curiosity, and Bertuccio with terror. At 5 o'clock precisely, the Count arrived before the house at Auteuil, followed by Ali. Bertuccio was awaiting this arrival with impatience, mingled with uneasiness. He hoped for some compliments, while, at the same time, he feared to have frowns. Monte Cristo descended into the courtyard, walked all over the house, without giving any sign of approbation or pleasure, until he entered his bedroom, situated on the opposite side to the closed room. Then he approached a little piece of furniture, made of rosewood, which he had noticed at a previous visit. "That can only hold gloves," he said. "Will your Excellency deign to open it?" said the delighted Bertuccio, "and you will find gloves in it." Elsewhere the Count found everything he required: smelling bottles, cigars, knick-knacks. "Good," he said, and Monsieur Bertuccio left enraptured. So great, so powerful, and real was the influence exercised by this man over all who surrounded him. At precisely 6 o'clock, the clatter of horses' hoofs were heard at the entrance door. It was our captain of Spahis, who had arrived on Medea. "I am sure that I am first," cried Morrel. "I did it on purpose to have you a minute to myself, before everyone came. Julie and Emmanuel have 1,000 things to tell you. Oh, really, this is magnificent. But tell me, Count, will your people take care of my horse?" "Do not alarm yourself, my dear Maximilian. They understand." "I mean, because he wants petting, and if you had seen what a pace he came, like the wind." "I should think so. A horse of that cost 5,000 francs," said Monte Cristo, in a tone which a father would use towards a son. "Do you regret them?" asked Morrel, with his open laugh. "I? Certainly not," replied the count. "No, I should only regret if the horse had not proved good. It is so good that I have distanced Monsieur de Château, one of the best riders in France, and Monsieur Debray, who both mount the minister's Arabians, and close on the heels are the horses of Madame Danglars, who always go at 6 leagues an hour." "Then they follow you?" asked Monte Cristo. "See, they are here." And at the same minute a carriage with smoking horses, accompanied by 2 mounted gentlemen, arrived at the gate, which opened before them. The carriage drove round and stopped at the steps, followed by the horsemen. The instant Debray had touched the ground, he was at the carriage door. He offered his hand to the baroness, who, descending, took it with a peculiarity of manner imperceptible to anyone but Monte Cristo. But nothing escaped the count's notice, and he observed a little note, passed with the facility that indicates frequent practice, from the hand of Madame Danglars to that of the minister's secretary. After his wife, the banker descended, as pale as though he had issued from his tomb instead of his carriage. Madame Danglars threw a rapid, inquiring glance at which could only be interrupted by Monte Cristo, around the courtyard, over the peristyle, and across the front of the house. Then, repressing a slight emotion, which must have been seen on her countenance if she had not kept her color, she ascended the steps, saying to Morrel, "Sir, if you were a friend of mine, I should ask you if you should sell your horse." Morrel smiled with an expression very like a grimace, and then turned round to Monte Cristo, as if to ask him to extricate him from his embarrassment. The count understood him. "Ah, madame, why do you not take that request of me?" "With you, sir?" replied the baroness. "One can wish for nothing, one is so sure to obtain it. If it were so with Monsieur Morrel—" "Unfortunately," replied the count, "I am witness that Monsieur Morrel cannot give up his horse, his honor being engaged in keeping it." "How so?" "He laid a wager he would tame Medea in the space of 6 months. You understand now, if he were to get rid of the animal before the time named, he would not only lose his bet, but people would say he was afraid, and a brave captain of Spahis cannot risk this, even to gratify a pretty woman, which is, in my opinion, one of the most sacred obligations in the world." "You see my position, madame," said Morrel, bestowing a grateful smile on Monte Cristo. "It seems to me," said Danglars, in his coarse tone, ill concealed by a forced smile, "that you already got horses enough." Madame Danglars seldom allowed remarks of this kind to pass unnoticed, but, to the surprise of the young people, she pretended not to hear it, and said nothing. Monte Cristo smiled at her unusual humility, and showed her 2 immense porcelain jars, over which wound marine plants, of a size and delicacy that nature alone could produce. The baroness was astonished. "Why," said she, "you could plant one of the chestnut trees and the Tuileries inside. How can such enormous jars have been manufactured?" "Ah, madame," replied Monte Cristo, "you must not speak of us, the manufacturers of fine porcelain, such a question. It is the work of another age, constructed by the genii of earth and water." "How so? At what period could it have been?" "I do not know. I have only heard that an emperor of China had an oven built expressly, and in this oven 12 jars like this were successfully baked. 2 broke, one from the heat of fire, the other 10 were sunken 300 fathoms deep into the sea. The sea, knowing what was required of her, threw over them her weeds, encircled them with coral, and encrusted them with shells. The whole was cemented by 200 years beneath these almost impervious depths, for a revolution carried away the emperor who wished to make the trial, and only left the documents proving the manufacture of the jars and their descent into the sea. At the end of 200 years the documents were found, and they thought of bringing up the jars. Divers descended in machines, made expressly on the discovery, into the bay where they were thrown, but of 10, 3 only remain, the rest having been broken by waves. I am fond of these jars, upon which, perhaps misshapen, frightful monsters have fixed their cold, dull eyes, and in which myriads of small fish have slept, seeking a refuge from the pursuit of their enemies." Meanwhile Danglars, who had cared little for such curiosities, was mechanically tearing off the blossoms of a splendid orange tree, one after another. When he had finished with the orange tree, he began at the cactus, but this, not being so easily plucked as the orange tree, plucked him dreadfully. He shuddered, and rubbed his eyes as though awaking from a dream. "Sir," said Monte Cristo to him, "I do not recommend my pictures to you, who possess such splendid paintings, but nevertheless here are 2 by Hobbema, a Paul Potter, a Mieris, 2 by Gerard Doux, a Raphael, a Van Dyck, a Zurbaran, and 2 or 3 by Murillo, worth looking at." "Stay," said Debray, "I recognize this Hobbema. Ah, indeed! Yes, it was proposed for the museum." "Which, I believe, does not contain one," said Monte Cristo. "No, and yet they refused to buy it." "Why?" said Château Renaud. "You pretend not to know. Because the government was not rich enough." "Oh, pardon me," said Château Renaud. "I have heard of these things every day during the last 8 years, and I cannot understand them yet." "You will, by and by," said Debray. "I think not," replied Château Renaud. "Major Bartolomeo Cavalcanti and Count André Cavalcanti," announced Baptistin. A black satin stock, fresh from the maker's hands, gray mustaches, a bold eye, a major's uniform, ornamented with 3 medals and 5 crosses, in fact, the thorough bearing of an old soldier. Such was the appearance of Major Bartolomeo Cavalcanti, that tender father with whom we are already acquainted. Close to him, dressed in entirely new clothes, advanced smilingly Count Andrea Cavalcanti, the dutiful son, whom we also know. The 3 young people were talking together. On the entrance of the newcomers, their eyes glanced from father to son, and then, naturally enough, rested on the latter, whom they began criticizing. "Cavalcanti," said Debray. "A fine name," said Morrel. "Yes," said Château Renaud, "these Italians are all well named and badly dressed." "You are fastidious, Château Renaud," replied Debray. "Those clothes are well cut and quite new." "That is just what I find fault with. That gentleman appears to be well dressed for the first time in his life." "Who are those gentlemen?" asked Danglars of Monte Cristo. "You heard, Cavalcanti. That tells me their names, and nothing else." "Ah, true. You do not know the Italian nobility. The Cavalcanti are all descended from princes." "Have they fortune?" "An enormous one." "What do they do?" "Try to spend it all." "They have some business with you, I think, from what they told me the day before yesterday. I, indeed, invited them here today on your account. I will introduce you to them." "But they appear to speak French with a very pure accent," said Danglars. "The son has been educated in a college in the south, I believe near Marseilles. You will find him quite enthusiastic." "Upon what subject?" asked Madame Danglars. "The French ladies, madame. He has made up his mind to take a wife from Paris." "A fine idea, that of his," said Danglars, shrugging his shoulders. Madame Danglars looked at her husband with an expression which at any other time would have indicated a storm, but for the second time she controlled herself. "The baron appears thoughtful today," said Monte Cristo to her. "Are they going to put him in the ministry?" "Not yet, I think. More likely he has been speculating on the bourse, and lost his money." "Monsieur and Madame de Villefort!" cried Baptistin. They entered. Monsieur de Villefort, notwithstanding his self-control, was visibly affected, and when Monte Cristo touched his hand, he felt it tremble. "Certainly, women alone know how to dissimulate," said Monte Cristo to himself, glancing at Madame Danglars, who was smiling on the procureur and embracing his wife. After a short time, the count saw Bertuccio, who, until then, had been occupied on the other side of the house, glide into the adjoining room. He went to him. "What do you want, Monsieur Bertuccio?" said he. "Your excellency has not stated the number of guests." "Ah, true. How many covers?" "Count for yourself." "Is everyone here, your excellency?" "Yes." Bertuccio glanced through the door, which was ajar. The count watched him. "Good heavens!" he exclaimed. "What's the matter?" said the count. "That woman, that woman!" "Which?" "The one with the white dress and so many diamonds, the fair one." "Madame Danglars." "I do not know her name, but it is she, sir, it is she." "Whom do you mean?" "The woman of the garden, she that was enceinte, she who was walking while we waited for her." Bertuccio stood at the open door, with his eyes starting and his hair on end. "Waiting for whom?" Bertuccio, without answering, pointed to Villefort with something of the gesture Macbeth uses to point out Banquo. "Oh, oh!" he at length muttered. "Do you see?" "What? Who?" "Him! Him! Monsieur de Villefort, the king's attorney. Certainly I see him." "Then I did not kill him?" "Really, I think you're going mad, good Bertuccio," said the count. "Then he is not dead?" "No, you see plainly he is not dead. Instead of striking between the 6th and 7th ribs, as your countrymen do, you must have struck higher or lower, and life is very tenacious in these lawyers, or rather there is no truth in anything you have told me. It was a fright of your imagination, a dream of your fancy. You went to sleep full of thoughts of vengeance. They weighed heavily upon your stomach. You had the nightmare. That's all. Come, calm yourself, and reckon them up. Monsieur and Madame de Villefort, 2. Monsieur and Madame Danglars, 4. Monsieur de Château Monsieur Debray, Monsieur Morel, 7. Major Bartolomeo Cavalcanti, 8. 8! repeated Bertuccio. Stop. You are in a shocking hurry to be off. You forget one of my guests. Lean a little to the left. Stay. Look at Monsieur André Cavalcanti, the young man in the black coat, looking at Murillo's Madonna. Now he is turning. This time Bertuccio would have uttered an exclamation, had not a look from Monte Cristo silenced him. "Benedetto!" he muttered. "Fatality!" "Half-past 6 o'clock has just struck, Monsieur Bertuccio," said the count severely. "I ordered dinner at that hour, and I do not like to wait." And he returned to his guests, while Bertuccio, leaning against the wall, succeeded in reaching the dining-room. 5 minutes afterwards the doors of the drawing-room were thrown open, and Bertuccio appearing said, with a violent effort, "Dinner awaits!" The Count of Monte Cristo offered his arm to Madame de Villefort. "Monsieur de Villefort," he said, "will you conduct the Baroness Danglars?" Villefort complied, and they passed on to the dining-room. End of chapter 62. 63 of the Count of Monte Cristo. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by David R. Miller. The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 63. The Dinner. It was evident that one sentiment affected all the guests on entering the dining-room. Each one asked what strange influence had brought them to this house, and yet astonished, and even uneasy though they were, they still felt that they would not like to be absent. The recent events, the solitary eccentric position of the count, his enormous, nay, almost incredible fortune, should have made men curious, and have altogether prevented ladies from visiting a house where there was no one of their own sex to receive them. And yet curiosity had been enough to lead them to overlap the bounds of prudence and decorum, and all present, even including Cavalcanti and his son, notwithstanding the stiffness of the one and the carelessness of the other, were thoughtful on finding themselves assembled at the house of this incomprehensible man. Madame Danglars had started when Villefort, on the count's invitation, offered his arm, and Villefort felt his glance was uneasy beneath his gold spectacles, when he felt the arm of the Baroness press upon his own. None of this had escaped the count, and even by mere contact of individuals the scene already acquired considerable interest for an observer. Monsieur de Villefort had on the right hand Madame Danglars, on his left Morrel. The count was seated between Madame de Villefort and Danglars, and the other seats were filled by Debray, who was placed between the two Cavalcanti, and by Château, seated between Madame de Villefort and Morrel. The repast was magnificent. Monte Cristo had endeavored completely to overturn the Parisian ideas, and to feed the curiosity as much as the appetite of his guests. It was an oriental feast he offered to them, but of such a kind as the Arabian fairies might be supposed to prepare. Every delicious fruit that the 4 quarters of the globe could provide was heaped in vases from China and jars from Japan. Rare birds, retaining their most brilliant plumage, enormous fish, spread upon massive silver dishes, together with every wine produced in the archipelago, Asia Minor, or the Cape, sparkling in bottles, whose grotesque shape seemed to give an additional flavor to the draught. All these, like one of the displays with which Apicius of old gratified his guests, passed in review before the eyes of the astonished Parisians, who understood that it was possible to expend 1,000 louis upon a dinner for 10 persons, but only on the condition of eating pearls like Cleopatra, or drinking refined gold like Lorenzo de Medici. Monte Cristo noticed the general astonishment, and began laughing and joking about it. "Gentlemen," he said, "you will admit that, when arrived at a certain degree of fortune, the superfluities of life are all that can be desired. And the ladies will allow that, after having risen to a certain eminence of position, the ideal alone can be more exalted. Now, to follow out this reasoning, what is marvelous? That which we do not understand. What is it we really desire? That which we cannot obtain. Now, to see these things which I cannot understand, to procure impossibilities, these are the study of my life. I gratify my wishes by 2 means, my will and my money. I take as much interest in the pursuit of one whim as you do, Monsieur Danglars, in promoting a new railway line, you, Monsieur de Villefort, in condemning a culprit to death. You, Monsieur Debray, in pacifying a kingdom. You, Monsieur de Château in pleasing a woman. And you, Morrel, in breaking a horse that no one can ride. For example, you see these two fish, one brought from 50 leagues beyond St. Petersburg, the other 5 leagues from Naples. Is it not amusing to see them both on the same table? What are the 2 fish? Asked Danglars. Monsieur Château who has lived in Russia, will tell you the name of one, and Major Cavalcanti, who is Italian, will tell you the name of the other. This one, I think, is a sterlet, said Château and that one, if I mistake not, is a lamprey. Just so. Now, Monsieur Danglars, ask these gentlemen where they are caught. Sterlets, said Château are only found in the Volga. And, said Cavalcanti, I know that Lake Fosuro alone supplies lampreys of that size. Exactly. One comes from Volga, and the other from Lake Fosuro. Impossible! Cried all the guests simultaneously. Well, this is just what amuses me, said Monte Cristo. I am like Nero, Cupitor impossibilium, and that is what is amusing you at this moment. This fish, which seems so exquisite to you, is very likely no better than a perch or salmon, but it seemed impossible to procure it, and here it is. But how could you have these fish brought to France? Oh, nothing more easy. Each fish was brought over in a cask, one filled with river herbs and weeds, and the other with rushes and lake plants. They were placed in a wagon built on purpose, and thus the sterlet lived 12 days, the lamprey 8, and both were alive when my cook seized them, killing one with milk and the other with wine. You do not believe me, Monsieur Danglars? I cannot help doubting, answered Danglars with a stupid smile. Baptistin, said the count, have the other fish brought in, the sterlet and the lamprey which came in the other casks, and which are yet alive. Danglars opened his bewildered eyes. The company clapped their hands. 4 servants carried in 2 casks covered with aquatic plants, and in each of which was breathing a similar fish to those on the table. But why 2 of each sort? Asked Danglars. Merely because one might have died, carelessly answered Monte Cristo. You are certainly an extraordinary man, said Danglars, and philosophers may well say it's a fine thing to be rich. And to have ideas, added Madame Danglars. Oh, do not give me credit for this, madame. It was done by the Romans, who much esteemed them, and Pliny relates that they sent slaves from Ostia to Rome, who carried on their heads fish which he calls the mulus, and which, from the description, must probably be the goldfish. It was also considered a luxury to have them alive, it being an amusing sight to see them die, for, when dying, they change colors 3 or 4 times, and like the rainbow, when it disappears, pass through all the prismatic shades. After which they were sent to the kitchen. Their agony formed part of their merit, and if they were not seen alive, they were despised when dead. Yes, said Debray, but then Ostia is only a few leagues from Rome. True, said Monte Cristo, but what would be the use of living 1800 years after Lucullus, if we can do no better than he could? The 2 Cavalcanti opened their enormous eyes, but had the good sense to say nothing. All this is very extraordinary, said Château. Still, what I admire most, I confess, is the marvellous promptitude with which your orders are executed. Is it not true that you only bought this house 5 or 6 days ago? Certainly not longer. Well, I am sure it is quite transformed since last week. If I remember rightly, it had another entrance, and the court was paved and empty, while today we have a splendid lawn, bordered by trees which appear to be 100 years old. Why not? I am fond of grass and shade, said Monte Cristo. Yes, said Madame de Villefort. The door was towards the road before, and on the day of my miraculous escape you brought me into the house from the road, and I remember. Yes, madame, said Monte Cristo, but I preferred to have an entrance which would allow me to see the Bois de Boulogne over my gate. In 4 days, said Morrel. It's extraordinary. Indeed, said Château. It seems quite miraculous to make a new house out of an old one, for it was very old and dull too. I recollect coming here for my mother to look at it when Monsieur de Saint-Méran advertised it for sale 2 or 3 years ago. Monsieur de Saint-Méran, said Madame de Villefort. Then this house belonged to Monsieur de Saint-Méran before you bought it? It appears so, said Monte Cristo. Is it possible that you do not know of whom you purchased it? Quite so. My steward transacts all my business for me. It is certainly 10 years since the house had been occupied, said Château, and it is quite melancholy to look at it, with the blinds closed, the doors locked, and the weeds in the court. Really, if the house had not belonged to the father-in-law of the procureur, one might have thought it some accursed place where a horrible crime had been committed. Villefort, who had hitherto not tasted the 3 or 4 glasses of rare wine which were placed before him, here took one, and drank it off. Monte Cristo allowed a short time to elapse, and then said, "It is singular, baron, but the same idea had crossed me the first time I came here. It looked so gloomy I should never have bought it if my steward had not taken the matter into his own hands. Perhaps the fellow had been bribed by the notary." "It is probable," stammered out Villefort, trying to smile, "but I can assure you I had nothing to do with any such proceeding. This house is part of Valentine's marriage portion, and Monsieur de Saint Méran wished to sell it, for if it remained another year or two uninhabited it would have fallen to ruin." It was Morrel's turn to become pale. "There was, above all, one room," continued Monte Cristo, "very plain in appearance, hung with a red damask, which, I know not why, appeared to me quite dramatic." "Why so?" said Danglars. "Why dramatic?" "Can we account for instinct?" said Monte Cristo. "Are there not places where we seem to breathe sadness? Why? We cannot tell. It is a chain of recollections, an idea which carries you back to other times, to other places, which, very likely, have no connection with the present time and place. And there is something in this room which reminds me forcibly of the chamber of Marquis de Ganges, or Desdemona. Stay, since we have finished dinner, I will show it to you, and then we will take coffee in the garden. After dinner, the play." Monte Cristo looked inquiringly at his guests. Madame de Villefort rose, Monte Cristo did the same, and the rest followed their example. Villefort and Madame Danglars remained for a moment, as if rooted to their seats. They questioned each other with vague and stupid glances. "Did you hear?" said Madame Danglars. Elizabeth de Rozan, Marquis de Ganges, was one of the famous women of the court of Louis XV., where she was known as La Belle Provinciale. She was the widow of Marquis de Castellane when she married de Ganges, and having the misfortune to excite the enmity of her brothers-in-law, was forced by them to take poison, and they finished her off with pistol and a dagger. Ed. "We must go," replied Villefort, offering his arm. The others, attracted by curiosity, were already scattered in different parts of the house, for they thought the visit would not be limited to one room, and that at the same time they would obtain a view of the rest of the house, of which Monte Cristo had created a palace. Each one went out by the open doors. Monte Cristo waited for the 2 who remained. Then, when they had passed, he brought up the rear. On his face was a smile, which, if they could have understood it, would have alarmed them much more than a visit to the room they were about to enter. They began by walking through the apartments, many of which were fitted up in the Eastern style, with cushions and divans instead of beds, and pipes instead of furniture. The drawing-rooms were decorated with the rarest pictures by the old masters, the boudoirs hung with draperies from China, of fanciful colors, fantastic design, and wonderful texture. At length they arrived at the famous room. There was nothing particular about it, excepting that, although daylight had disappeared, it was not lighted, and everything in it was old-fashioned, while the rest of the rooms had been redecorated. These 2 causes were enough to give it a gloomy aspect. "Oh," cried Madame de Villefort, "it is really frightful!" Madame Danglars tried to utter a few words, but was not heard. Many observations were made, the import of which was a unanimous opinion that there was something sinister about the room. "Is it not so?" asked Monte Cristo. "Look at the large clumsy bed, hung with such gloomy, blood-colored drapery, and those crayon portraits that have faded from the dampness. Do they not seem to say, with their pale lips and staring eyes, 'We have seen'?" Villefort became livid. Madame Danglars fell into a long seat placed near the chimney. "Oh," said Madame Villefort, smiling, "are you courageous enough to sit upon the very seat upon which the crime was committed?" Madame Danglars rose suddenly. "And then," said Monte Cristo, "that is not all." "What, is there more?" said Debray, who had not failed to notice the agitation of Madame Danglars. "Ah, what else is there?" said Danglars, "for at present I cannot say that I have seen anything extraordinary. What do you say, Monsieur Cavalcanti?" "Ah," he said, "we have at Pisa Ugolino's tower, at Ferrara Tasso's prison, at Rimini the room of Francesca and Paolo." "Yes, but you do not have this little staircase," said Monte Cristo, opening the door concealed by the drapery. "Look at it. Tell me what you think of it." "What a wicked-looking crooked staircase," said Château with a smile. "I do not know whether the wine of Chios produces melancholy, but certainly everything appears to me black in this house," said Debray. Ever since Valentine's dowry had been mentioned, Morrel had been silent and sad. "Can you imagine," said Monte Cristo, "some Othello or Abbé de Ganges, one stormy, dark night, descending these stairs, step by step, carrying a load which he wishes to hide from the sight of man, if not God? Madame Danglars half fainted on the arm of Villefort, who was obliged to support himself against the wall. "Ah, madame," cried Debray, "what is the matter with you? How pale you look!" "It is very evident what is the matter with her," said Madame de Villefort. "Monsieur Monte Cristo is relating horrible stories to us, doubtless intending to frighten us to death." "Yes," said Villefort. "Really, Count, you frighten the ladies." "What is the matter?" asked Debray in a whisper of Madame Danglars. "Nothing," she replied with violent effort. "I want air, that is all." "Will you come to the garden?" said Debray, advancing towards the back staircase. "No, no," she answered. "I would rather remain here." "Are you really frightened, madame?" said Monte Cristo. "Oh, no, sir," said Madame Danglars, "but you suppose scenes in a manner which gives them the appearance of reality." "Ah, yes," said Monte Cristo, smiling. "It is all a matter of imagination. Why should we not imagine this apartment of an honest mother, and this bed with red hangings, a bed visited by the goddess Lucina, and that mysterious staircase, the passage through which, not to disturb their sleep, the doctor and nurse pass?" Here Madame Danglars, instead of being calmed by the soft picture, uttered a groan and fainted. "Madame Danglars is ill," said Villefort. "It would be better to take her to her carriage." "Ah, mon Dieu," said Monte Cristo, "and I have forgotten my smelling bottle." "I have mine," said Madame de Villefort, and she passed over to Monte Cristo a bottle full of some kind of red liquid whose good properties the count had tested on Edward. "Ah," said Monte Cristo, taking it from her hand. "Yes," she said, "at your advice I had made the trial." "And have you succeeded?" "I think so." Madame Danglars was carried into the adjoining room. Monte Cristo dropped a very small portion of the red liquid upon her lips. She returned to consciousness. "Oh," she cried, "what a frightful dream!" Villefort pressed her hand to let her know it was not a dream. They looked for Monsieur Danglars, but he was not especially interested in poetical ideas. He had gone into the garden, and was talking with Major Cavalcanti on the projected railway from Leghorn to Florence. Monte Cristo seemed in despair. He took the arm of Madame Danglars and conducted her into the garden, where they found Danglars taking coffee between the Cavalcanti. "Really, madame," he said, "did I alarm you much?" "Oh, no, sir," she answered, "but you know, things impress us differently, according to the mood of our minds." Villefort forced a laugh. "And then, you know," he said, "an idea, a supposition, is sufficient." "Well," said Monte Cristo, "you may believe me if you like, but it is my opinion a crime has been committed in this house." "Take care," said Madame de Villefort, "the king's attorney is here." "Ah," replied Monte Cristo, "since that is the case, I will take advantage of his presence to make my declaration." "Your declaration?" said Villefort. "Yes, before witnesses." "Oh, this is very interesting," said Debray. "If there really has been a crime, we will investigate it." "There has been a crime," said Monte Cristo. "Come this way, gentlemen. Come, Monsieur Villefort, for a declaration to be made available should be made before the competent authorities." He then took Villefort's arm, and at the same time, holding that of Madame Danglars under his own, he dragged the procureur to the plantain tree, where the shade was the thickest. All the other guests followed. "Stay," said Monte Cristo, "here, in this very spot," and he stamped upon the ground. "I had the earth dug up and fresh mold put in, to refresh these old trees. Well, my man, digging, found a box, or rather the ironwork of a box, in the midst of which the skeleton of a newly born infant." Monte Cristo felt the arm of Madame Danglars stiffen, while that of Villefort trembled. "A newly born infant," repeated Debray. "This affair becomes serious." "Well," said Château, "I was not wrong just now, then, when I said that houses had souls and faces like men, and that their exteriors carried the impress of their characters. This house was gloomy because it was remorseful. It was remorseful because it concealed a crime." "Who said it was a crime?" asked Villefort with a last effort. "How is it not a crime to bury a living child in a garden?" cried Monte Cristo. "And pray, what do you call such an action?" "But who said it was buried alive?" "Why bury it if it were dead? The garden has never been a cemetery." "What is done to infanticides in this country?" asked Major Cavalcanti innocently. "Oh, their heads are soon cut off," said Danglars. "Ah, indeed," said Cavalcanti. "I think so. Am I not right, Monsieur de Villefort?" asked Monte Cristo. "Yes, count," replied Villefort, in a voice now scarcely human. Monte Cristo, seeing that the two persons for whom he had prepared this scene could scarcely endure it, and not wishing to carry it too far, said, "Come, gentlemen, some coffee. We seem to have forgotten it." And he conducted his guests back to the table on the lawn. "Indeed, count," said Madame Danglars, "I am ashamed to own it, but all your frightful stories have upset me so, that I must beg you to let me sit down." And she fell into a chair. Monte Cristo bowed, and went to Madame de Villefort. "I think Madame Danglars again requires your bottle," he said. But before Madame de Villefort could reach her friend, the procureur had found time to whisper to Madame Danglars, "I must speak to you." "When?" "Tomorrow." "Where?" "In my office, or in the court if you like. That is the surest place." "I will be there." At this moment Madame de Villefort approached. "Thanks, my dear friend," said Madame Danglars, trying to smile. "It is over now, and I am much better." Chapter 63.